people who are maybe change averse in general sometimes use I don't want to say excuse, but they'll say regulators haven't been clear. We don't know the expectations.
Yeah.
We're afraid to move forward, or legal doesn't want us to move forward. I asked you about the state of play at the beginning broadly, but on the regulatory side, are the regulations, they're lagging behind? I mean, where are we there?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fascinating question, because you're absolutely right in the way you frame it. Often people will use the regulator as the boogeyman, the person that's making it difficult for us to move forward. I have to say that after 30 years in the industry, it's not necessarily what I believe. I often find the regulators are more forward-thinking and thoughtful. Than, we're such a conservative industry, as we touched on earlier, Michael, and sometimes I find that conservatism gets in the way. We get in the way of ourselves rather than the regulators do. But I think to some extent, though, that reflects what I said at the top of this interview, that we're really not overrun with DCT trials at the moment. So maybe that reflects the urgency with which they view this space. It's not that it's transformed our industry overnight, or is going to over the next 12 months or something like that. Maybe. I mean, that's a personal view, but that was the first thing, that they didn't necessarily have their guidance ready. But the key to all of it at the end, the takeaway for me is that what the regulator's concerned about is two things: the oversight and safety of the patient, and the integrity of the data that's going to be submitted in the long run. Sitting back, waiting for the regulator to pronounce, is actually kicking the can down the road. We know what we have to do. We have to demonstrate that when we're doing these DCT trials, we have adequate oversight of the patient, and that we're protecting the integrity of the data. I don't know that guidance is necessarily going to make that much impact to the way we think about that.
Fantastic. Now let's also talk about another potential game changer here. CVS, Walgreens, and others are entering this space pretty aggressively. They've got numbers, they've got locations, they've got reach. How do you see them impacting the DCT and the industry in general?
Well, they're one feature of what the DCT area is bringing, and that's different types of site models. So you've thrown out CVS, Walgreens, etc. That's one model where you can see patients in a different type of setting, in that case, a pharmacy setting or a retail setting. We're also seeing, of course, an increase in the use of decentralized visits, so sending coordinators out to the houses of patients to see them there. That's not new, by the way. I remember doing that in the 1990s, but that's come back, and we've seen new companies establish themselves in that space. And of course, we've seen the completely siteless model, like Science 37 promotes. We've also seen mobile units. So there's suddenly, and this is, ultimately this is a positive feature of what's going on in DCT. We're seeing different types of site model come out. The question is going to be, how many of those are going to survive, and how many of them are going to offer something into the future? A little bit like if you go back to the .com revolution at the beginning of the 20th century, it came crashing down, but it left behind a lot of good businesses and good ideas that were then taken, expanded upon, and grew up. Amazon would be a good example of that, right? So I see the same thing here with these different type of site models. Not all of them are going to survive. Some will, and the ones that do and thrive will, be a positive and will bring new things to our industry. But in the main, it's all those models are about, how do you increase accessibility of clinical trials for patients? And so I believe those are positives in the longer term. The challenge right now is they have to be commercially viable. So there has to be a value proposition. The value proposition is we can do something that brings a value that somebody is prepared to pay you a price for, that you can do it and still make money. That's fundamentally how it works. I see some of the new models, and the question will be, can you do that profitably? Because if you can't, if no one's going to pay you to do that profitably, it will go away. And so that's still the question. And I see that with some of the capital that's being invested in these new models. They may not be as efficient commercially as they need to be to survive. And that's going to be the real test. There comes a point where you have to stop pumping private equity money into them and they have to stand on their own 2 feet. So I still think that needs to play out, with CVS and Walgreens and so on. Yes, that's not private equity money, but there's a limit to what a corporation's prepared to invest in a business model. Good luck to them if it works. And I hope what it'll do is bring trials to more patients. But the real test is whether it brings trials to more minority patients that genuinely don't have access. And that's going to be the real taste test for those types of models, I think.
Paul Evans, you've managed to make me feel a little more optimistic about the future. For that, I thank you. This is great. Wonderful
Thank you very much,
discussion.
Michael.
Thank you
Great
so
to
much for
talk.
joining us.
Thank you.